All right, good day, everyone. This is CJ with Rogue Money, and I am very excited for today. V is stuck in meetings today, so I will be doing the honor and privilege today. It's been a while since we've had Harley on, but he needs no introduction. Harley, I want to welcome you back. It's been a couple weeks, so welcome back.
Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks. I had a long postponed vacation and I'm raring to go.
Well, I know it was a well-deserved vacation. I know that you are probably still plugged into everything that is going on. So much to talk about, so I'll just go ahead and let you start.
Well, let me start with something that probably very few people have seen yet in the United States, which is a report produced by the Institute in London. And it's a report which says that those people who believe what the President of the European Union said in his State of the Union address, uh, when he said that the economy in Europe is strong and in the midst of a 5-year recovery, the Adam Smith Institute said anyone who believes that is crazy. They said that the banks have more leverage today, that is, they're less than they were in 2008. He said that the quantitative easing and the cheap money has allowed them to grow, but it's allowed them to increase their liabilities without the ability to cover their costs. And that if the European Central Bank starts cutting back, which it's going to do, then we are an accident away from a financial collapse bigger than in 2008. Now, this is one of a series of warnings that have come out recently. The former finance minister of Italy, Giulio Tremonti, issued a similar statement. There are some similar kinds of comments coming from France and elsewhere. But with the German election campaign underway, they're trying to make sure that Merkel wins. And so what we're being told is that Germany is strong, Germany is doing really well. And Schäuble, the finance minister of Germany, is telling people privately there's going to be a new wave of austerity after the election. So, the European situation is very weak. And I have to say this for our American listeners, the US economy is not experiencing a recovery. That the same problem affecting the European banks are there with the US banks. And the biggest problem we have is that the president has not been able to move on his economic policy because of obstruction from both Democrats and Republicans, as well as the attempts to overthrow him with a regime change run by the deep state. So we're coming into September. The only thing that has changed that's for the good is that we didn't have a debt ceiling gun to our heads. But that's just been postponed for 3 months. I think people have to realize that this could be a very hot autumn when it comes to the.
You're absolutely right. We just crossed the $20 trillion threshold. We kicked the can down the road until December. Who knows what happens now until then? But in terms of the obstacles that the both parties continue to throw at the administration, it's very hard for Trump to take a look. Whether it's his tax cuts, whether it's partnering with other countries. Harley, what can be done at this stage? I mean, what specifically is Trump? What is the administration facing as far as these tax cuts? I think that's the next on the radar for the administration. Correct?
Well, I think the tax question is one that Trump has said several different things. I mean, he made a promise the other day that it's not going to be tax cuts for the wealthy, which if he sticks to that, that would be good. But instead give middle class tax cuts. But taxes, that's the wrong place to look. But there was something that was really fascinating, and I'm going to challenge your listeners with this because I've always believed, and Mr. LaRouche has always said, that the debt ceiling is an artificial conception, that the idea that somehow you're putting a limit on the borrowing when in fact you know that you're going to have to increase it because the revenues are constantly falling short from the obligations, especially when you shut down the productive part of the economy. how do you expect to generate an increase in value added to the economy when you have a policy which shuts down production, shuts down manufacturing, shuts down high wage jobs, offshores them? You can't. So the idea that somehow you're going to achieve a debt ceiling that's going to please everyone by, if you raise it, you're going to cut somewhere else, that's a phony conception that was introduced by the neoliberals, the post-Keynesians, you might say, on the so-called right side. Now, what LaRouche has proposed is that you separate infrastructure from the regular federal budget. And this is an important conception because if you look at what Trump has promised to do with infrastructure, how do you add it to a budget which is already 20 trillion in the red? How do you add it when you don't have money to cover the existing costs? But the idea of a capital budget, which is something that Eisenhower used very effectively with the National Highway Program through the Highway Trust, this is something that would work. That is, you separate it out. Because the important thing about infrastructure is that per dollar spent today, you're not going to get a return in the same fiscal year. You may not even get a return in 2 or 3 fiscal years. But you're not looking for a one-to-one return from the revenue generated from infrastructure. The point of infrastructure is it improves the functioning of the overall economy. Your value added comes from cheapening the cost of transportation, the improvements in the product of your workforce. So if you have a capital budget separate from the federal budget, the obligations of the federal government, you can begin to see how it is that not only will that capital budget be met by the improvements in the overall economy, but that will also help you deal with the problem of the budget deficit, the federal deficit. So I think what was interesting is after Trump made the deal with Pelosi and Schumer, he said possibility of getting rid of the debt ceiling. And I know a lot of people said, oh, that's heresy, you can't do that. But what if in their minds they're actually thinking of replacing a debt ceiling with a capital budget, which is an old idea, which goes back to the founding fathers, to Hamilton, to Lincoln, but an idea that any competent corporation has, that a competent corporation always has to have an area for research and development, for improving the productivity, the energy intensity, and the capital intensity of their business. That's what a capital budget is about. And the idea that that's something that might possibly be in Trump's mind means not only could we escape in the future the gun to the head from the debt ceiling debate, but you actually would have the ability to invest in infrastructure in such a way that we could actually do something that would significantly improve the overall economy. So I'm saying this is a challenge for your listeners because whether people know it or not, they have this neoliberal conception that government is bad because it takes up too much money. But what if government is investing money that is creating credit that goes into physical production and not government-owned companies, but goes into the private sector, available through the banking system? Instead, what we have now with the Federal Reserve, which is an atrocity, is the Federal Reserve is creating debt in order to give money to banks to allow for speculation. So what Trump might be moving towards, and I'm not saying he is, I don't know this for a fact, but there's a potential promise in his discussion about getting rid of the debt ceiling that's not just a political solution, but actually represents a significant change in how we do economics in this country.
Right. No. Uh, Great point. That's very valid. And I've never looked at it from that approach. But when you think about that and the ability to insert that as capital to help the economy, it does make sense. And you're true. It's such an artificial debt ceiling that is there. Now, I do want to ask in part because Yesterday Maduro announced that he was going to stop accepting the dollar as reserve currency. China and Russia now are looking at, and Iran, at exchanging in yuan. Harley, what's your thoughts as far as the dollar and reserve currency, whether it's a petrodollar, the trade we're seeing right now, an escalation of events of several countries leading away from the dollar as reserve currency?
Well, I have to just say personally, I'm a little angry that the dollar has been allowed to drop as it has, because I have to exchange dollars for euros living in Europe, and the euro has gone way up to the dollar, even though the European economy is not strong. But look, I don't think that there's a serious alternative to the dollar at the moment, unless there's a complete dollar collapse, either a hyperinflationary collapse or just a massive deflation. There's not an alternative. The Chinese are creating incredible amounts of credit for production. And I think it makes sense to do some trading in yuan and certain other currencies. But the idea that the dollar is going to be thrown out the window, uh, that's not about to happen. But the problem is, what's going to happen overall with the global economy if we don't break out of the free trade neoliberal policies that have dominated the last 30 to 40 years, the floating exchange rates, the speculation. I think I saw the figures the other day for the European Union of the 1.2 trillion euros that were created in quantitative easing. Well over half of them went to the British banks. Brexit
Wow.
a number of months ago, yet the money is still flowing into the British banks. That's the way the European Union works. And less than 100 billion, or about 120 billion actually, out of the 1.2 trillion actually went to the so-called real economy. But because of the structure of the European economy, we don't even know how much of that actually is the real economy. I know that German machine tool sector is hungry for cash. They can't get credit. That the same kind of problem exists in France, where Macron is trying to do these reforms without addressing the question of how do you expect people, existing productive workers, to accept cuts in their wages when you're not offering them future job opportunities or improvements in jobs? Why would you expect them to accept it? So unless there's a shift on the macro side, that is moving toward capital budgets, moving toward the kind of infrastructure that China is doing, that Japan and India are talking about. There was just a meeting, the Vladivostok Economic Forum, which Putin addressed, where Prime Minister Abe was there, and there were extensive discussions now about Japan, South Korea, and Russia doing deals to build new ports, to build new rail systems. The Japanese Prime Minister Abe met with Narendra Modi, the Indian Prime Minister, and they talked about Japanese bullet trains in India. So you have the positive side of this break with the unipolar world is that you have alternatives now where there is credit available and it's going into investment. The negative side of it is that you still have a New York Federal Reserve, a Washington Federal Reserve, a Bank of England, and a European Central Bank, which are holding the world hostage by forcing countries to accept the old Washington consensus of austerity, budget cuts, but they're rejecting it now. So, as Mrs. LaRouche often says, we're in a new economic paradigm. Now, the danger is that this new economic paradigm is an existential threat to the speculative swindlers of London and the Federal Reserve and Wall Street. So that's why there is a continued pressure against the Russians, against the Chinese, an attempt to turn Trump against China. And I'll tell you an interesting thing. There's a report today from Japan that Trump will be in China in November after the next US ASEAN summit. I think it's November 12th. And that he'll go from China to Japan, and that there are things being put in place. And even Bannon, who often speaks against China when he was working in the administration. Bannon was in Hong Kong yesterday, and he did an interview with the South China Morning Post. And he said, look, I'm not anti-China. We're just going to have to work some things out. But he said, I have great respect for President Xi Jinping of China. So I think that what I've been reporting for quite a while is that under Trump, the US could move into an alliance with the Silk Road potential, the Silk Road, the One Belt, One Road policy of China. And this would mean American firms would begin participating in the Belt and Road. It would also mean that the Chinese and even the Japanese will help with investment in infrastructure in the United States so that we won't have to generate all the credit from a new capital budget. In fact, there was an interesting proposal from an economist in New Jersey. He said instead of having the Fed divest itself of the various financial instruments that they purchased from banks as part of quantitative easing, why not turn that into a pool to create a basis for borrowing money to invest in infrastructure? So there are different ideas out there, but I think this idea of a capital budget is crucial for Americans to think about. LaRouche wrote several articles in 2006 about how to turn a deficit into a capital budget. And we're seeing more discussion of this. It's the only way you can fund infrastructure in a way that makes sense, because it takes what the founding fathers did, what Lincoln did.
Harley, I think I lost your audio there.
Okay, you have it
Oh,
back?
yeah, it's back now. So about I lost you for about 3 or 4 seconds.
Okay, I was just saying that what Eisenhower did, what Hamilton did, what Lincoln did, what John F. Kennedy was doing when they killed him, of creating treasury credit for investment. And
I think the powers there. You're back again.
okay, I read some of your posters who think that there may be an attack on my on me when I speak here. So I'm
On
very
on the internet, right?
yeah,
Yes,
right.
yes.
But anyway, the point is, and maybe they don't want this to get out, but the idea of a capital budget or treasury credit, which Kennedy started to do in June 1963, shortly before he was assassinated, where the government creates credit that goes into production and then ties tax incentives to investment in new job creation, in new plant and equipment. That's what we need. And if Trump were to go in that direction, then it would solve the problem he has politically of people saying, well, what has he done for us? Well, this is a way to possibly bring some Democrats who support infrastructure, and hopefully he can bring the Republican Party into line on this.
Right, right. Could that perhaps be the move in terms of him reaching a hand out across the aisle and trying to build some bridges? I know there's a lot of speculation here in regards to his, partnering up with Nancy Pelosi. Obviously, I think the media has it all wrong. But what's your take on that, Harley?
Well, I think Pelosi and Schumer are acting out of weakness. The media is trying to say Trump is doing this out of weakness. Look what the Democratic Party is. You've got Hillary Clinton shooting her yap off all over the place about how Bernie Sanders sabotaged her, Putin sabotaged her, and the basket of deplorables sabotaged her. So she's still attacking the people the Democrats need if they're going to win elections. Then you have the rumor that Barack Obama is about to throw himself back into the political arena. Well, what could be better for Trump? So I think what you're seeing with people like Schumer and Pelosi and Feinstein, who are opportunists of the highest order, is this sense that the Democratic Party, if it's only anti-Trump, is going to destroy itself. And so there may be areas where they can work with Trump. So I think rather than seeing this as a betrayal by Trump, I think this is a fairly savvy move to take advantage of the weakness in the Democratic Party. At the same time, he's going after the corrupt Republicans like McConnell and Paul Ryan, which I think is very worthwhile.
That's great points, and again, I appreciate you saying that because now I can calm down a little bit. Harley, that's why our listeners and our audience appreciates having you on, is because you make so much sense out of some of the chaos and trying to understand everything. In any closing thoughts, Harley?
Yeah, look, the chaos is deliberately created so people can't think about these things. Now, I'm not saying that Trump is going to do all these things. I'm saying there's an option for him to do it. And this is what we in the LaRouche movement, with our international capabilities, are trying to push him towards. Were he to make these kinds of steps, he will pull together a majority bigger than he had for the election that will enable him to succeed with some legislative. If he doesn't do that, he's going to be battered back and forth on Russiagate, on Republicans fearing that he's selling out to Pelosi and Schumer. I mean, Republicans who back Trump should realize that if you're supporters of Trump, you're not going to have a problem. The people who are having problems in the Republican Party are the ones who oppose Trump, like Flake, like these guys. So I think the important thing is keep an eye on the bigger picture and not on what's in the media. And then look at this possibility of a reorganization of the economy around principles of physical economy, because that's the way we can solve these problems.
Excellent, excellent. Very well said. So, Harley, thank you so much for joining us today. Glad to have you back. Glad you had your vacation. And until next week.
Okay, look forward to it.
All right, everyone. This is CJ. V will be back next week with Harley. So excited for that as well. And everyone, enjoy your afternoon, and thank you for listening in. Take care.